What happens when a power-hungry cop humiliates a quiet black woman in public, only to walk into court the next day and realize she is the judge holding his fate in her hands. This is the story of a man who mistook silence for weakness and paid for it in the worst possible way. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The morning sun stretched lazily across the quiet suburban street, painting long golden lines over trimmed hedges and neatly parked cars, the kind of peaceful setting where nothing ever seemed to go wrong, and certainly nothing extraordinary ever happened. Yet inside a modest brick home at the end of the block, Vanessa Carter moved with calm, deliberate precision, her presence steady, controlled, almost surgical in its quiet authority, though nothing about her appearance would have suggested. The weight she carried, dressed simply in a tailored navy blouse and charcoal slacks, her hair neatly styled, her expression composed, she looked like any other professional heading into a routine day, perhaps a teacher, perhaps an office worker, someone ordinary, someone easily overlooked, and that was exactly how she preferred it, because power, real power, did not need to announce itself. It simply existed, waiting for the right moment to be seen. She paused briefly at the kitchen counter, her fingers brushing against a leather folder filled with documents, each page carefully arranged, each detail memorized, her eyes scanning them one last time, not out of doubt, but out of discipline, a habit formed over decades of responsibility, where mistakes were not just costly, they were unacceptable, and as she closed the folder with a soft, decisive motion, there was a quiet finality to it, the kind that suggested today was not just another day, though no one else would have known that. Outside, the world carried on as usual, a neighbor walking his dog, a distant lawn mower humming, the faint echo of children laughing somewhere down the block, ordinary sounds that blended into a rhythm Vanessa had long learned to navigate without distraction. She stepped out onto her front porch, locking the door behind her with a soft click, her posture straight, her movements unhurried, every step measured, intentional, as if she moved not through space, but through purpose itself. As she reached her car, a sleek but understated sedan, she placed the folder carefully on the passenger seat before settling behind the wheel, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel for just a moment longer than necessary. Her gaze steady through the windshield. There was something in her eyes then, something deeper than calm, something earned, forged through years of navigating systems that were not built for her. Rooms where she had to prove herself twice as much for half the recognition, battles fought not with fists but with intellect, patience, and an unbreakable will. And yet, none of that showed on the surface to the outside world. Vanessa Carter was simply another black woman starting her day, invisible in plain sight, underestimated before she even spoke a word. And as the engine started with a quiet hum and she pulled out onto the street, merging seamlessly into the flow of morning traffic, there was no hint, not even the smallest sign, that within the next 24 hours, that same quiet, composed woman would stand at the center of a courtroom, commanding absolute authority, while the man who would soon try to break her would realize, far too late, that he had just made the worst mistake of his life. Vanessa's sedan merged into the steady flow of late morning traffic, the city gradually tightening around her as quiet residential streets gave way to busier intersections, storefronts, and a low hum of daily life building in layers. But a few miles ahead, just past a stretch of road where construction cones narrowed the lanes, red and blue lights flickered suddenly in her rearview mirror, sharp and intrusive against the calm rhythm she had settled into. And for a brief moment, her eyes lingered on the reflection, not with panic, but with recognition, the kind that came from years of understanding how quickly a routine stop could turn into something else entirely. She signaled without hesitation, guiding her car smoothly onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching softly as she came to a complete stop, both hands resting visibly on the steering wheel, posture upright, controlled, every movement deliberate. And, as the engine idled, the silence inside the vehicle felt heavier than it should have, charged with something unspoken. Officer Ryan Whitaker stepped out of his patrol car with the slow, confident swagger of someone who had done this 1,000 times before and never once been questioned, his mirrored sunglasses catching the sunlight as he adjusted his belt, his gaze already locked onto Vanessa's vehicle like he had made a decision long before he even approached, his boots striking the pavement with purpose, each step carrying an air of authority that bordered on aggression. He reached her window and rapped his knuckles sharply against the glass. Not a polite knock, but a command, and Vanessa lowered the window calmly, her expression neutral, her voice steady. "Good morning, officer." Whitaker did not return the courtesy, his eyes sweeping over her face, her hands, the interior of the car, searching, judging, calculating, his lips curling slightly as if he had already found what he was looking for. "License and registration," he said, his tone clipped, impatient, not a request, but an order delivered with quiet contempt. Vanessa nodded once, slowly reaching for her purse, narrating her movement with calm precision. "I'm reaching into my bag for my documents." Whitaker's posture stiffened at that, his hand hovering near his holster in exaggerated caution, though nothing in her demeanor warranted it, and that subtle overreaction was not lost on her. She handed him her license and registration without incident, her fingers steady, her gaze level, but Whitaker barely glanced at them before speaking again. "Step out of the vehicle." There was no explanation, no stated reason, just the demand hanging in the air like a test. And for a fraction of a second, the world seemed to pause, the distant sounds of passing cars and construction fading into the background. Vanessa's eyes met his, calm but unyielding. "May I ask why I'm being asked to step out, officer?" The question, simple and respectful, seemed to irritate him more than defiance would have. His jaw tightened, and he leaned slightly closer to the window, his voice dropping, edged with something colder. "Because I said so. That enough reason for you?" The arrogance in his tone was unmistakable, heavy, deliberate, and when she did not immediately move, his patience snapped. "Out of the car. Now." His voice rose just enough to draw attention from a passing driver who slowed slightly before continuing on, unwilling to get involved. Vanessa exhaled slowly, then unbuckled her seatbelt and opened the door, stepping out with the same controlled grace she had carried all morning, her hands visible, her posture composed, but Whitaker did not step back to give her space. Instead, he shifted closer, invading it, circling her slightly as if inspecting something he had already decided was suspicious. "You people always got somewhere important to be," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for her to hear, his eyes narrowing behind the tinted lenses. "Always acting like the rules do not apply." Vanessa said nothing, and that silence only seemed to feed whatever irritation had been building inside him, the tension between them tightening, invisible but undeniable, like a storm gathering without warning. The tension hung thick in the air, invisible but suffocating, and Officer Whitaker seemed to draw energy from it, his posture growing more rigid, more territorial, as if Vanessa's silence itself was a challenge he could not tolerate, his boots scraping against the gravel as he took another step closer, invading her space deliberately, forcing her to either retreat or stand her ground. And when she did neither, when she simply remained still, composed, her hands relaxed at her sides, it unsettled him in a way he did not fully understand. "You got anything illegal in the vehicle?" he asked abruptly, though his tone made it clear he was not really asking, his head tilting slightly as if daring her to contradict him. Vanessa's gaze did not waver. "No, officer." Her voice was even, controlled, neither defensive nor submissive, and that balance seemed to irritate him more than outright resistance ever could. Whitaker let out a short, humorless chuckle, shaking his head as if amused by something only he could see. "Yeah, they all say that," he muttered, then raised his voice again, sharper now. "Turn around." The command came without warning, heavy with implication, and for a brief moment, the world narrowed to that single instruction, the distant hum of traffic continuing on as if nothing unusual was happening, as if this moment was just another routine stop, Another interaction that would go unnoticed, undocumented, unquestioned. Vanessa did not move immediately. Instead, she spoke, her tone still calm, still measured. "Officer, I have complied with your requests. If there is a reason for further action, I would appreciate you stating it clearly." The words were respectful, precise, but they carried a quiet firmness that cut through the imbalance he was trying to create, and Whitaker's expression hardened instantly, the faint trace of a smirk disappearing as something colder took its place. "You do not get to ask me questions," he snapped, stepping closer again, his voice dropping into a low, threatening register. "You follow instructions. That is how this works." His hand reached out suddenly, gripping her upper arm, not violently, but firmly enough to assert control, to make the power dynamic unmistakably clear, and he turned her slightly, positioning her as he saw fit, his fingers tightening just enough to remind her that compliance was not optional in his world. Vanessa allowed the movement, her body responding without resistance, but her eyes remained forward, her expression unchanged, and that lack of visible fear seemed to frustrate him further. "You think you are better than everyone else?" he continued, his voice edged with something personal now, something beyond protocol, beyond procedure. "Pulling that calm act like it is going to save you." He leaned in slightly, close enough that his words were meant for her alone. "Out here, it does not mean a thing." Vanessa inhaled slowly, then exhaled just as deliberately, grounding herself in the moment, her voice steady when she spoke again. "I'm not resisting you, officer." It was not a challenge, not a plea, just a statement of fact, but even that seemed to provoke him, his grip tightening briefly before releasing as he stepped back, pacing once in a short, agitated line, as if recalibrating, searching for the next move that would re-establish his sense of dominance. He glanced toward her car, then back at her, his decision forming in real time. "We're going to take a closer look," he said finally, his tone shifting into something that mimicked procedure but lacked its legitimacy. "And you're going to cooperate every step of the way." The words hung between them, heavy with implication, as the line between authority and abuse blurred further, and Vanessa, standing there under the open sky with nothing but quiet resolve, knew exactly where that line had already been crossed. Whitaker's decision settled over the scene like a verdict already passed, and without waiting for acknowledgement, he turned sharply toward his patrol car, grabbing his radio with a quick, practiced motion. "Dispatch, I have a situation requiring secondary inspection," he muttered, though his tone carried more performance than necessity, as if announcing authority mattered more than procedure. A second cruiser, already idling further down. The road rolled closer, tires crunching against gravel as another officer stepped out, slower, quieter, watching but not intervening. Whitaker glanced back at Vanessa, his expression now hardened into something colder, more deliberate. "We are not doing this out here," he said, gesturing toward his vehicle. "You are coming with me." Vanessa's eyes followed his motion briefly, then returned to his face, calm, unreadable. "Am I being detained, officer?" The question landed with precision, not raised, not aggressive, just exact, and it struck a nerve. Whitaker's jaw tightened. "You are being investigated," he corrected, though the distinction was thin and intentional. He stepped forward again, this time not waiting, his hand closing around her wrist, firm, controlled, guiding rather than asking, but with enough pressure to eliminate any illusion of choice. Vanessa did not resist. She moved with him, her steps steady, her posture unbroken, even as the dynamic shifted further into imbalance. The open road no longer neutral ground, but something narrower, more confined. The back door of the patrol car opened with a heavy mechanical click, and Whitaker gestured sharply. Inside, there was a pause, brief but noticeable, as passing cars slowed just slightly, drivers glancing over before looking away, unwilling to involve themselves in something that already felt too official, too complicated. Vanessa lowered herself into the seat without protest, her hands resting calmly in her lap, her gaze forward, and when the door shut behind her, the sound echoed louder than it should have, sealing more than just space. Minutes later, They arrived at a small auxiliary station just off the main road, a squat concrete building that carried the same sterile authority as every other place designed to control rather than serve. Whitaker opened her door and motioned her out again, his impatience now visible in the tightness of his movements. "Let's make this quick," he said, though nothing about his tone suggested efficiency, only intent. Inside, the air was cooler, fluorescent lights humming faintly overhead, casting everything in a flat, unforgiving glow. A narrow hallway led to a small back room, bare except for a metal chair, a counter, and a wall mirror that reflected the scene with uncomfortable clarity. Whitaker gestured again, sharper this time. "Seat." Vanessa complied, lowering herself into the chair with the same quiet control she had maintained from the beginning, her hands resting lightly against her thighs, her shoulders squared. The second officer lingered near the doorway, silent, watching, his presence passive but complicit. Whitaker paced once, then stopped directly in front of her, his eyes scanning her face, searching for something. Fear, anger, anything that would justify what he had already decided to do. When he did not find it, something in him shifted, irritation hardening into something more deliberate, more personal. He reached toward the counter, picking up a small electric clipper, its cord dragging softly across the surface, the low hum starting as he flicked it on, the sound filling the room with a cold, mechanical presence. "You people think you can walk around like you are untouchable," he said, his voice low, almost conversational now, which made it more unsettling. He stepped closer, the hum of the clipper growing louder as it approached, his shadow falling across her face. "Let us see how that confidence holds up after this." Vanessa's reflection stared back at her in a mirror, calm, steady, unbroken, even as the situation crossed from misconduct into something far more deliberate, far more humiliating, and still, she did not flinch. The low hum of the clipper filled the small room, steady, mechanical, almost hypnotic, and for a brief second, time seemed to stretch thin as Officer Whitaker stood over Vanessa, the device buzzing in his hand, his shadow cutting across the mirror where her calm reflection remained unshaken, her eyes focused, not on him, but on herself, as if anchoring to something deeper than the moment unfolding around her. "Last chance," he said, though there was no real offer in his voice, only the illusion of one, his lips curling slightly as he waited for a reaction that never came. Vanessa did not speak. She did not plead, did not argue, did not even shift in her seat. That silence, that refusal to give him anything, seemed to seal his decision. "That is what I thought," he muttered, and then, without hesitation, he stepped closer, the clipper rising, the sound intensifying as it neared her head. The first pass was deliberate, slow, the vibration cutting through the stillness as it moved across her hair, and though the act itself was simple, the intention behind it was unmistakable, calculated humiliation disguised as control. The second officer shifted uncomfortably near the doorway, his weight moving from one foot to the other, but he said nothing, did nothing, his silence as complicit as the act itself. Whitaker continued, each movement methodical, almost ritualistic, as if asserting dominance through repetition, his breathing steady, his expression fixed in a smug satisfaction that grew with every second, every pass of the clippers reinforcing the imbalance he had created. "Look at that," he said under his breath, glancing at the mirror, forcing her to witness it, to see what he was doing, as though the reflection itself was part of the punishment. "Not so composed now, are you?" But even as he said it, something did not sit right. Vanessa's expression had not changed. There was no panic, no anger, no visible crack in her composure, only that same steady gaze, unflinching, unbroken, and for a fleeting moment, doubt flickered across his face, quickly buried beneath another layer of arrogance. He pushed forward, finishing the act with a final, careless motion, the hum of the clippers cutting off abruptly as he switched them off, the sudden silence louder than the noise had been. He stepped back, examining his work like a man admiring something he had built, not destroyed, his chest rising slightly with a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with ego. "There," he said, his tone almost casual now, as if what had just happened was nothing more than routine. "Maybe now you will remember how things work out here." He placed the clipper back on the counter with a soft clatter, then reached for his phone, lifting it briefly, angling it toward her reflection, capturing the moment without permission, a quiet click breaking the silence once more. The second officer looked away this time, his discomfort more visible, but still, he did not intervene. Whitaker slipped the phone back into his pocket, satisfied, then gestured toward the door. "You are free to go," he said, the words almost mocking in their delivery, as if freedom had not just been stripped from her in a far more profound way. Vanessa rose slowly from the chair, her movements just as controlled as before, her posture unchanged, her dignity intact despite everything that had been done. And as she turned slightly, her eyes met Whitaker's for the first time since it began, not with anger, not with fear, but with something far more unsettling, certainty. She said nothing as she walked past him. Out of the room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the hallway stretching ahead, and behind her, Whitaker watched with a faint frown forming, unable to explain why her silence now felt heavier than anything she could have said. Vanessa's footsteps echoed softly down the narrow hallway, steady, unhurried, as if nothing of consequence had just occurred, but behind her, the weight of what had been done lingered in the air, clinging to the walls, to the silence, to the man who now stood watching her leave with an expression he could not quite place. "Hold on," Whitaker called out suddenly, his voice sharper than before, cutting through the moment as he stepped forward, closing the distance in 2 quick strides. "We are not done yet." Vanessa stopped. Slowly, she turned back toward him, her posture still straight, her gaze level, that same unsettling calm settling over the room again. Whitaker reached for a clipboard on the counter, flipping it open with a quick, irritated motion, grabbing a pen and pressing it hard against the paper as he began scribbling. "Failure to comply," he muttered, more to himself than to her, though his voice carried enough for her to hear. "Suspicious behavior. Interference with an investigation." Each charge was spoken as if saying it made it real, as if authority could be built out of thin air and arrogance alone. He glanced up at her briefly, his eyes narrowing. "You are lucky I'm letting you walk out of here without cuffs." The word lucky hung in the air, heavy with implication, and he stepped closer again, holding the clipboard out just enough to assert control, not enough for her to read clearly. "Sign this." Vanessa did not move to take it. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at him now, her eyes steady, focused as if measuring something beyond the moment, beyond the room, beyond him. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried with unmistakable weight. "Officer Whitaker, I'm going to give you one opportunity to stop." The words were not loud, not forceful, but they landed with a precision that cut through the tension like a blade. Whitaker blinked once, caught off guard not by defiance, but by the tone, the certainty behind it. Vanessa continued, her gaze unwavering. "What you have done today, what you are about to put on that paper, it has not disappeared just because you say it does." There was no threat in her voice, not in the traditional sense, but something far more dangerous, clarity. "You still have time to walk this back." The room went still. Even the faint hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade for a moment. The second officer shifted near the doorway, his eyes flicking between them, something uneasy creeping into his expression as if he could feel the shift that Whitaker refused to see. "But Whitaker," he let out a short laugh, sharp and dismissive, the sound breaking the moment like glass. "You think you are in a position to give me options," he said, his voice rising slightly, incredulous, amused, but underneath it, there was something else, defensiveness quickly buried beneath arrogance. He shook his head, the smirk returning, stronger now, reinforced. "Let me make something very clear to you," he continued, stepping closer, his tone dropping again, quieter, more deliberate. "Out here, I decide what happens. Not you, not anyone else. He tapped the clipboard with the pen for emphasis. "You sign, or I make this a whole lot worse." Vanessa held his gaze for a long moment, the silence stretching just enough to make the air feel heavy again. And then, slowly, she shook her head once, not in defiance, but in finality. "Then you have already made your choice," she said. Whitaker scoffed, turning slightly away as he scribbled something else onto the paper, his movements sharper now, more aggressive, as if doubling down on his own authority, sealing his decision with every stroke of the pen. "Yeah," he muttered. "I did." And just like that, the last chance to undo what had been set in motion slipped away. Not taken, not even recognized, crushed under the weight of a man too certain of his power to see the edge he was standing on. Whitaker's pen scratched aggressively across the paper, the sound sharp, final, as if each stroke sealed something permanent, something unquestionable. And when he finished, he tore the sheet free with a quick motion and held it out again, his patience gone, his authority absolute in his own mind. "Last time," he said flatly, "sign it." Vanessa did not reach for the paper. Instead, she reached slowly into her purse, the same deliberate motion as before. But this time there was something different in the air, something that shifted the weight of the moment without a single word spoken. And Whitaker noticed it, his eyes narrowing, his body tensing instinctively, as if sensing something he could not yet understand. "I am retrieving identification," Vanessa said calmly, her voice steady, controlled, each word placed with precision, and then she withdrew a small leather case, worn but impeccably maintained, holding it for a brief second before flipping it open. She did not thrust it forward. She simply held it at chest level, angled just enough for him to see. For a moment, Whitaker did not react. His eyes flicked down, casual at first, dismissive, expecting nothing more than a driver's license, something to reinforce the narrative he had already built in his mind. But then his gaze froze. The shift was immediate, subtle, but undeniable. His smirk faltered, the corners of his mouth tightening as his eyes moved across the badge, the seal, the unmistakable insignia that did not belong to someone ordinary, did not belong to someone powerless, and then to the name beneath it. Judge Vanessa Carter. The room went silent in a way that felt absolute, the kind of silence that swallowed sound rather than simply lacking it. And for the first time since this began, Whitaker did not speak. His grip on the clipboard loosened slightly, the edge dipping just a fraction as his mind struggled to catch up with what his eyes were telling him. "That is not," he started, but the words fell apart before they could form, his voice thinner now, uncertain, the confidence that had filled it moments ago draining out almost visibly. Vanessa did not move closer. She did not raise her voice. She simply held the identification steady, her gaze locked onto his, unblinking. "I am Judge Vanessa Carter," she said, each word measured, deliberate, leaving no room for doubt, no room for interpretation. "And everything that has happened here today is now a matter of record." The second officer straightened abruptly at the doorway, his posture snapping into something far more formal, his eyes widening as recognition set in, his silence no longer passive but stunned. Whitaker's breathing changed, shallow, uneven, his hand instinctively reaching out as if to take the identification, to verify it, to deny it, but stopping halfway, uncertain, as though touching it might make it more real. You should have said something," he muttered, the words weak, almost pleading, a desperate attempt to shift blame, to rewrite the last hour into something that made sense, something he could control again. Vanessa's expression did not change. "You did not ask," she replied, her voice calm. But now there was something else beneath it, authority, unmistakable, undeniable, no longer hidden. Whitaker took a step back, then another, the space between them widening as if distance alone could undo what had just been revealed, his mind racing, replaying every moment, every word, every action, each one now recontextualized into something far more dangerous than he had ever intended, and the realization hit him all at once, heavy, suffocating. He had not just crossed a line, he had erased it entirely. And now, standing in that small, sterile room, With the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the weight of her gaze fixed on him, Officer Ryan Whitaker understood, with a clarity that left no room for escape, that the power he had so confidently wielded was never truly his to begin with. The realization did not fade. It deepened. It settled into the room like a weight that could not be lifted, pressing down on Officer Whitaker's chest as his confidence unraveled piece by piece. And for the first time since this encounter began, he stood without control, without authority, without the illusion of power he had clung to so tightly. Vanessa closed the leather case slowly, the soft click echoing louder than it should have, final, deliberate, and without another word, she turned toward the door. "This interaction is over," she said calmly, not as a request, not as a suggestion, but as a statement of fact. The second officer stepped aside immediately, almost instinctively, his posture rigid, his eyes avoiding Whitaker now, as if distance could shield him from the fallout that was already beginning to unfold. Whitaker opened his mouth, searching for something, an explanation, an apology, anything, but nothing came out. The words he had used so freely before now felt distant, inaccessible, replaced by a growing awareness that every second of the past hour had been witnessed, recorded in ways he could not undo. Vanessa walked past him without hesitation, her steps steady, her presence commanding in a way that required no volume, no force, and, as she exited the building, the door closing behind her with a quiet, decisive sound. Whitaker remained where he stood, frozen in the aftermath of his own actions. The silence did not last long. Within minutes, the atmosphere shifted. Radios crackled. Voices changed. The same system he had relied on to protect him now began to move in a different direction, one he could not control. Internal affairs arrived first, their demeanor cold, procedural, unaffected by rank or familiarity. "Officer Whitaker," one of them said, his tone neutral but firm, "we need you to step outside." There was no aggression, no raised voices, just certainty, the kind that did not invite resistance. Whitaker hesitated, then complied, his movements slower now, heavier, as if each step carried the weight of what he had done. Outside, more vehicles had gathered, unmarked cars, additional officers, the quiet escalation of something official, something irreversible. His badge, once a symbol of unquestioned authority, suddenly felt like evidence. "Hands where we can see them." Another voice instructed, not hostile, but precise, leaving no room for interpretation. Whitaker obeyed, his hands rising slightly, his mind racing, trying to piece together a path out of this, but there was none. The clipboard he had held so confidently earlier now lay forgotten on the counter inside, its accusations meaningless compared to what was coming. "You are being placed on administrative leave, pending investigation," the internal affairs officer continued, his voice steady, detached. "Turn around." The command echoed the same structure Whitaker had used before, but now it carried a different weight, one rooted in accountability rather than control. For a brief moment, Whitaker closed his eyes, the reality settling in fully, and then he turned, complying, his hands guided behind his back. Not roughly, not violently, but firmly enough to make the shift undeniable. Around him, the world continued as it always had. Cars passing, people moving, life unfolding, but for him, everything had changed. Inside that quiet, unremarkable building, a line had been crossed, and outside, under the same open sky where he had once stood in control, Officer Ryan Whitaker now stood on the other side of it, no longer the one giving orders, but the one answering for them, as the system he had misused turned, finally, to face him. The weight of accountability did not end on that roadside or within the walls of that small station. It followed through every corridor it needed to, until it arrived exactly where it belonged. And, by the next morning, the same system that had once been twisted now stood firm, structured, and unyielding inside a quiet courtroom bathed in soft morning light, the polished wood reflecting a sense of order that had been momentarily broken but never truly lost. Vanessa Carter stepped through the side entrance with measured grace, her head held high. Her appearance changed, but her presence stronger than ever. The absence of her hair, no longer a mark of humiliation, but a silent testament to endurance, to dignity that could not be stripped away by force or arrogance. Conversations hushed as she passed, subtle nods of respect following her, not out of fear, but recognition, the kind that acknowledged both her authority and what she had endured without ever needing to speak of it. Inside the courtroom, everything was in its place, files aligned, flags standing still, the quiet anticipation of justice ready to be carried out properly. And when Vanessa took her seat behind the bench, the room settled into a silence that felt earned, not imposed. There was no need for raised voices, no need for spectacle, only the steady presence of law restored to its rightful balance. Outside, the world continued in its usual rhythm, traffic flowing, people moving through their day, unaware of the shift that had taken place, unaware that something unjust had been confronted and corrected without chaos, without noise, simply through truth and accountability. Back at the station, Officer Whitaker's absence was already being felt in a different way, not as authority, but as a reminder, a cautionary absence that spoke louder than his presence ever had, his badge no longer a shield, his name now part of a record that would not be rewritten. And Vanessa, as the proceedings of the day moved forward, carried none of the anger that might have been expected, none of the bitterness that could have lingered, only a quiet, unwavering focus on the responsibility before her, on the cases that still needed judgment, on the people who depended on fairness, not force. When the session concluded, she rose with the same calm precision she had shown from the beginning, gathering her documents, stepping down from the bench as the courtroom slowly came back to life around her, conversations returning, footsteps echoing softly against the floor. She did not look back. She did not need to. As she exited into the daylight once more, the sun now higher in the sky, brighter, warmer, there was a sense of stillness that followed her, not emptiness, but peace, the kind that comes when something wrong has been made right, when power is no longer abused but held accountable. Vanessa Carter walked forward, not as a victim, not as someone defined by what had been done to her, but as exactly who she had always been, a guardian of justice, steady, unshaken, and, as the door closed quietly behind her, the world at last felt balanced again. There is something deeply revealing about the way power behaves when it believes no one is watching. In this story, Officer Whitaker did not act out of necessity or even anger. He acted out of certainty. The certainty that his position placed him beyond consequence, that his version of reality would be accepted without question. What makes this moment so striking is not just that he was wrong, but how completely unprepared he was for that truth. Vanessa Carter did not defeat him with force or confrontation. She allowed him to reveal himself fully, without interruption, without resistance, until there was nothing left to hide behind. That is where real justice becomes undeniable, not in dramatic retaliation, but in quiet exposure. His downfall was not caused by her power, but by his inability to recognize limits. And perhaps that is the deeper reflection here. Authority without humility does not just harm others, it blinds the person holding it. It creates a world where consequences feel optional, until suddenly they are not. Vanessa walked away unchanged in who she was, but Whitaker was forced to confront who he had become. And in that contrast, the balance of justice was restored, not loudly, but permanently. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.